Welcome, everyone. My name is Sharik Abdulghani. I am the director of Minaret Foundation, where our focus is multi-faith and civic engagement. Today, we have a very special program here today where we have faith leaders, senior faith leaders in the city of Houston, and our very own HPD's Chief Acevedo. And we are talking about the state of policing here in Houston. Triggered by the murder of Mr. Floyd, police departments around the country are under fire and close watch, especially after a surge of audio and video evidence of abuse of power by officers sworn to protect their communities. In Houston, Chief Acevedo has acknowledged the need to work with communities for safer and better policing, and in the face of criticism has doubled down on the need to work together to move forward through relational policing. Today, we're going to have a hard conversation with Chief Acevedo about the current state of law enforcement in Houston, his strides with relational policing, and working with faith communities to heal the divide. And with us today, we have Rabbi Oren Hayon of Congregation Emmanuel. We have Imam Walid Basuni, Clear Lake Islamic Center, Pastor Harvey Clemens of Pleasant Hill Baptist Church, and we have Bishop Andy Doyle of the Episcopalian Diocese, and Chief Acevedo needs no introduction. But if I could just go around the room very quickly, and if I could just have all of you give just a brief introduction about who you are, and about who you are, and perhaps a blessing that you've had today, a blessing from God that you've just enjoyed in your life. If we could start off with Rabbi Hayon.
Hi, everybody. Good to be with you, Chief. Glad to see you again. Thanks for giving us this time. So I'm Rabbi Oren Hayon. I'm the senior rabbi at Congregation Emmanuel, which is in the Rice University Museum District neighborhood. I'll say this has been this time of lockdown and pandemic has been a really good time for slowing down and counting blessings. I have found myself very grateful, despite all the craziness and upheaval, for the presence of my family and for the additional time we've had to spend together to just sort of slow down and enjoy each other's company. So that's been a great blessing in my life over the past couple of months.
Bishop Doyle.
Thank you. Yeah, it's good to be with you all. I oversee 163 parishes plus institutions and campus missions over 47,000 square miles of Texas, about 57 counties, and of which 70, though, are right here in the Houston area. So I'm really excited about our conversation today, and wanted to simply say that I think one of the real blessings of our time has actually been drawing us together in forums like this to do some really good work with good people. And so I'm really excited about our time together and our conversation, and know that part of what makes it fantastic is I think all of us are here with a deep desire to do well for the city of Houston.
Pastor Clemens.
Well, good evening, and thank you again for inviting me to be part of this. My name is Harvey Clemens Jr. I am the fourth pastor in the history of the Pleasant Hill Church that was founded in 1925. I've been serving there for now 37 years. The blessing for me of the day and of this whole season is a reaffirmation of the existence of our God. It is obvious and clear when we look at the COVID-19 virus and that humans are not in control. Some of the best minds on the planet has not been able to figure out the mystery to this puzzle. And then when we look at how one human will treat another human with cruelty, and we don't seem to be able to get it right, it's clear that we are not in control. And so every time, for me, there's a reaffirmation that God exists, that he is real, and that he is conducting the affairs of humanity even now.
Thank you, Pastor Clemens. Imam Walid?
My name is Walid Bassiouni, and I'm a PhD holder in Islamic Studies, and I'm the director and the Imam of Clear Lake Islamic Center in the southeast area of Houston. I've been serving there as the director for more than 20 years now. And also at the same time, I'm leading another organization called Al Maghrib Institute, which is an educational institute. We offer seminars. We used to do it on weekends, but now we do it over Zoom. And we have over 53 or 54 actually branches around the globe, and over 150,000 students we taught in the last decade or so. Also, I'm a member of something called the Muslim Jurist in North America. So that leads me to the blessing that I really very grateful to God for it. During this pandemic, I have a lot of things on my plate to travel for, but during these days, I was able to enjoy being more with my community, being more connected to my local community. That not a day goes by and our center will not help someone locally in our area. So, and also I would like to say thank you for Merit Foundation, shout out for putting us together, for all of you guys being here, and for Chief for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Imam Walid. Chief Acevedo, if you want to give a brief introduction for those of us who aren't acquainted with who you are, and a blessing that you encounter in your life. Oh, let me.
You need to unmute yourself, Chief.
Here we go. It seems like everyone's got different systems. I think I've been every single Zoom and I don't know what else. So this is my first one. This one, but good afternoon. Thanks for having me. It's really exciting to be here. And you know, I'm Art Acevedo, the police chief in Houston, Texas. I've been here for 3.5 years. Prior to that, I served in Austin, Texas, for 9.5 years, and before that, I served with the California Highway Patrol for 21 years, leaving there as a chief in 2007. And I was born in Cuba. I'm an immigrant. English is my second language. I'm a person of faith. I'm a Christian, but I believe that we're all worshiping the same God. We just have different prophets, and we have little differences. But when you really look at it, faith is what binds us all together. And I think that my biggest blessing in life, besides being a father and a husband and a friend, is the privilege of leadership and the privilege of public service, which at times like this, that are some people will consider challenging times, I would say that it's an opportune time to continue to move our profession, our community forward. So thank you all for being part of this, and thanks for having me. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Chief Acevedo, and thank you to all our faith leaders here with us today. And for those of you who are watching, if you do have questions, comments, feedback, please feel free to post it on Facebook or on YouTube, and then we'll get to them if we can. But I'm just going to dive right in, Chief, with our first question. And as everyone knows, this is a conversation. It's not an interview. It's not necessarily a panel discussion. We're all at a coffee shop. I've got my water. And then maybe some of you guys have. There you go. Excellent. Very good. We're just a bunch of folks just hanging out at a nice coffee shop, maybe in the Heights, maybe in Third Ward, maybe in a nice area. But relational policing has become a great way of describing safer policing and a method to build a stronger relationship between law enforcement and the community they serve. We also know that relational policing doesn't have a set framework and is really a subjective concept. Chief Acevedo, from your interviews, your tweets, and your public statements, you've shown you are a big advocate of relational policing. What does relational policing look like to you?
Well, thank you for that's a great question. It's I started talking about instead community policing, relational policing about 5 years ago. I was in a meeting with my then city manager from Austin, Mark Ott in Washington, and I started thinking about life is really about relationships and community policing. Too many police chiefs say, well, we can't engage in community policing because we don't have enough police officers. We don't have enough time. We're just going from call to call. And I think what we were missing is the fact that every time we contact a member of the community, that's the beginning of a relationship. They always say that you don't get a second chance at first impressions, and first impressions are very lasting. Well, that one and only contact, that first contact, maybe the one and only contact that we have as members of law enforcement and as peace officers and public safety professionals. And so I started thinking to myself, why don't we talk about this in terms of relational policing? And that is a recognition that we are radically dependent on one another, whether it's communities of faith, police and community, neighbors. We're very dependent on one another. That's what makes COVID so difficult. I'm a hugger. I'm a toucher. I think that that's just the way that God wired us. We need to have that connectivity. And so I came up with the acronym of TREAT, which is, I say that it's a mutual responsibility between the law enforcement and government and the people we serve. It's a mutual responsibility between communities, between different faiths, between everyone, right? And even family members. But for us in law enforcement, it's also a sworn duty. And so we don't just have a responsibility, we have a duty. And it's really a really simple acronym. It's TREAT. It's TREEAT. And the first one's transparency. And, we need to be as transparent as possible. Transparency can't be reckless, though. And so there are times when we have to follow the law that doesn't let us release certain things or proper protocol. But we need to be as transparent as possible. We need to have respect. And I tell my men and women that respect starts with self-respect. If you don't respect yourself, if you don't respect your own family, if you don't respect your own organization, you can't gain the respect of others. And then we have to engage in the first E. You've got to engage people. You do not build relationships, whether it's externally as a police chief or internally as a leader. You don't build relationships via the 16th floor of headquarters sitting behind a desk. You've got to get out there and you've got to engage people. You've got to let them know your heart. They got to know, you need to know their heart. During the protest, people are trying to say that, why is he out there? Well, because I wanted to connect with people. I wanted to engage with people. I wanted to feel their pain. I want them to see the empathy that we feel as leaders. And while you're engaging, you're building the emotional capital that we all need when we have to make those tough decisions as leaders and have to fire or have people leave the department, like 160 that we've had to let go since I've been here for 3.5 years. You got to build an emotional capital. And then we have to hold each other accountable, right? Because accountability is something that's lacking too much in society. What we do is we point fingers at each other and look like a bunch of octopuses, but we've got to hold people accountable, and everyone has to be held accountable. And then if we're transparent, we engage, we're respectful, we engage people to build emotional capital, and we hold people accountable. We end up building trust, and that's really the commodity that we rely on. I think that the relational policing, when you look at our response to the protests, have not been perfect, but I would say that our community and the Houston Police Department have really been a model for how a community should engage its police and how the police should engage its community, because of that mindset that we have, that we're one Houston from many parts of the world, but we're not on an island. We're radically dependent, and that's why we have to engage in relational policing.
I think that actually that's an interesting piece to as you talk about accountability. I think, from an institutional leader perspective, we certainly in the Christian church have come under a lot of scrutiny of late, and it's a hard thing as a leader to keep your clergy, for instance, accountable, people who are your friends, people who you minister with, people who were peers prior in some way to becoming the head. And so it's a very difficult thing. And so one of the pieces I'm curious about is, the basis for our society actually comes out of the consent of the people to be governed. Yeah. And so one of the big questions I think that is before us is, what does in a kind of post-conflict era, where it's not the police against the people or the police against the bad guy, that we actually are a community that would be a community of accountability. And what would it look like to live into a different kind of accountability around your relational model? In other words, you're not just accountable to the group that oversees private, that we don't know who that group is, but I can't remember the acronym, but you have some different places, but what does public accountability look like? And I'm wondering about, as you're looking at that, Chief, what do you see that's promising, like on the horizon? But sometimes that can be a mechanical fix. And so I'm also curious about what are the questions you're asking yourself about how can accountability be different in this moment after the marches?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, accountability needs to be different in that the promises that are being made for change have to be kept, right? I mean, what's the purpose of of marching and protest and saying that we feel people's pain if we don't actually turn that into action? And so one of the things that I'm hopeful about is that the focus has really been on law enforcement because we're probably the most visible cog of the government, right? We're the even the most visible cog of the criminal justice system. But I think as people start drilling deep into where we're at as the state of the profession, as imperfect as this profession is, when they start digging into the conflict, when they start digging into where we fall short, what we're going to find out is that the only way that we're going to fix policing, truly fix it, is if we address societal issues that go beyond policing. If we bring the transparency into the criminal justice system, if we bring the transparency into the private sector in terms of the loan practices of big banks, the hiring practices of corporate America, the promotional practices outside of government, because we follow some real strict rules in terms of civil service rules in government. Yet some of the watchdogs, including the media, you go into their corporate world, there's not very much diversity there. There's not much opportunity for people of color, people from foreign nations, people of different religions. And so I'm hopeful that we're at a moment of time where I think for the first time, Bishop, George Floyd's death has triggered something in the American psyche. And there's been so much division in our country. I remember speaking about 5 years ago to about 600 a community of about 600 at a big gala in Austin. It was a Christian dinner, a big gala. And I remember telling them maybe 4 years ago, right before I got here, or maybe I was already here, I can't remember now. I remember telling them that our country is upside down. I believe in spiritual warfare, right? Because if there's a God, I think there's a devil. And I think he's running rampant right now. And we're the biggest target as this country because we're still, as imperfect as we are, the nation that's really the nation that brings hope to the rest of the world. And if you can take this country down, you're well on the way of just really making problems for the entire world. I remember telling them at that time is that pay close attention because a lot of law enforcement leaders have been speaking out on issues that not just within law enforcement, but also in society. We've actually promoted, not taking low-level misdemeanors to jail. They have mental illness, let's divert them. That's law enforcement that's been pushing that. I mean, here at the Ed Emmett Center, 68% of that is ours. But I remember telling this at this gala, I told all these people of faith that if somebody would have told me as a little boy growing up that, or even 15 years ago, that what we accept as normal behavior today, what we accept as normal speech from the highest levels of the highest offices in the land, would be accepted by the American people, I would have told them they're crazy, right? Today's normal. And I remember telling them that, we can fool each other. We can fool our rabbi. We can fool our imam. We can fool our pastor or bishop, but we can't fool God. And I think that what has happened is that our country, when we're talking about painting people with broad brushes, painting people of African Americans, well, they're all, thugs or Latinos. They're all coming in from south of the border to rape everyone and murder and steal our jobs, or people from the Middle East that may be Muslim of faith. They're all terrorists. And the way we were talking about each other, it ran contrary to our values. I said, God was watching and he's going to hold us accountable, not just for what we said, not just for what we've done, but what we have failed to do and what we have failed to say. And I have a sneaking suspicion, Bishop, that what's happened with George Floyd is that it has created something that is an awakening, that we're finally recognizing that maybe we should have been supporting a man quietly kneeling in protest with the national anthem, taking a knee, and Colin Kaepernick, I've been telling people, did you prefer that or did you prefer people burning down cities? Because we can't rule with an iron fist in this country. We rule nothing. What we do is serve with the consent of the people that place us in these positions. So I think we're at a very unique moment. I think there's a great awakening, and as a person that thinks that the glass is half full at all times, I have a sneaking suspicion we're not just going to deal with the shortcomings of law enforcement, but we're finally going to deal with the shortcomings of public health, of mental health, of addiction, of public education, of economic opportunity, of housing opportunity, and we're going to put that lens and widen the view to realize once and for all that there's been a lot of disenfranchised people in this country, and it's time for us to acknowledge it as a nation. Because until we do that, we'll be having this conversation long after we're all retired.
Yeah, and Chief Acevedo, as Bishop Doyle mentioned about accountability and how we have to be accountable to our people, you'd also mentioned that acronym TREAT.
Yeah.
About transparency and relational. You'd also mentioned something about that the response to the protests may not have been perfect, right? So moving forward, would you be able to mention, as it relates to relational policing, what about the response wasn't perfect? What about the response do you regret, and how you are trying to fix that within a framework of relational policing that you have for your officers?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think that on balance, I had chiefs from around the country calling, how the heck did you guys with 60,000 people and the most diverse city? And I like to always say that Houston is the city of tomorrow for the rest of the country. Houston is where the rest of the country is going to be in 20 years, whether people like it or not. We are a big melting pot, and that's what this country is becoming. I mean, we're also hooked on, we also worry so much about race in this country that we forget we're all cousins. If we go back in the history of humanity, we're all cousins, we're all part of one race, and that's the human race. But what we're doing is reviewing a lot of video to see if there's any instances where our officers didn't act appropriately. I can tell you that on most instances, they utilized a lot of patience. They took a lot of the anger that was, and they did a phenomenal job, considering especially the fact that we're a pretty young department. We have a lot of young people. So we're reviewing all of that footage to take corrective action and disciplinary action if it's warranted. But I can tell you that my only regret right now is I saw too many of our officers, including myself, not wearing our masks. And, there's this big debate about whether the protest caused this big increase in COVID. I think it's a combination of both. But God put in my heart not to be wearing my mask all the time because I was trying to connect with the people that were in pain. And it's really hard to really have that connection when half your face is covered. But I remember praying every time I go into a crowd, and I said, Lord, I want the Holy Spirit to cover me because I need some coverage. I'm doing this because I feel like police work is doing the Lord's work. And, so far I've had 3 COVID tests that have come back negative, and 3 of the antibody tests have come back negative. But what we've seen so far is that we've done a pretty good job, but so did the community. I marched for 3.5 hours one day with the group from the 3rd Ward. Beautiful march. A few tense moments that we got through by communicating and by leading from the front, right? And I remember we were marching back to Emancipation Park. Another group that was coming out at night came running at us, firecrackers being lit, bottles being thrown, and they tried to hijack that peaceful march. And our young African-American leaders that we had worked with that day, young men and women, would have none of it. I can't tell you how much pride I have. But I think that, to me, maybe not having more of our folks actually out walking with everybody was probably the one thing I think I would like to do differently. Get more of my people out there to actually listen and communicate and form restorative circles where our young officers can hear from the community and the community could have heard from them.
Now, but in terms of accountability so you mentioned that you guys at HPD are reviewing all the videos of what happened at the protests, and I think as faith leaders, we always have to look forward, but we also have to look backwards a little bit as well to see what it is that we did wrong and how we can fix it moving forward in the future, especially because 60,000 people marched, and it wasn't 60,000 people above the age of 75. It was 60,000 people between the ages of 14 and 80, and just everyone was out. The whole city was out there. And in the beginning, it was peaceful. But then towards the end, there were issues that were recorded in multiple areas. Chronicle recorded it. It was on Twitter. But not to keep going on the protests, but in terms of what happens with officers, because what we saw in the videos, to us, to me especially, that wasn't necessarily relational policing. That wasn't what you, sir, exemplify in your tweets, in your comments, in your public statements. It wasn't something that we saw really coming out. How do you course correct such actions?
Well, I mean, first of all, let me just say this. It's the biggest problem with managing big protests is this. The majority of the folks are exercising the First Amendment rights, but unfortunately, radical people get in the middle of the crowd that is just there to exercise the First Amendment rights. And what they do is that they start throwing stuff from the middle of a peaceful crowd. I will tell you that we did not deploy any tear gas. The only guy that we did a little pepper spray right in the front line a few times. No tear gas, none of that crazy stuff. Because what happens with those rubber bullets that just spray everybody, you can't target the person as being violent. What happens is that it's almost like when you go fishing for shark and you catch a dolphin, you feel bad. So you don't ever want to have that. So what I can tell you is that when we identify, we've got several investigations going. As we identify inappropriate conduct, we take it on head on, and we will actually hold people accountable. But by the same token, I told you accountability is a two-way street. For those that think that it was completely peaceful on the public side, that is not true. I can show you a lot of video of officers that were injured, that were being spit on, that were had stuff thrown at them, police cars that were destroyed. But compared to other cities, both the public and the police, neither side was perfect, but we were well above average. And I think that on balance, we both the public and the police get a passing grade. I would say we give everybody a B, because you don't want to give an A, because once you think you've arrived and you can't get any better, there's only one way to go, and that's down. But so far, I was pretty pleased with both sides of that equation. But we always seek perfection, understanding you're never going to achieve it.
Well, I think now, here's where we're going to get in trouble with our faith, and then I'm going to hand it off to somebody else. But I do think, Chief, there's a piece of this which is, so on what day will we hear how many films were reviewed and how many officers were disciplined, and how, like, that's a public accountability. Yes. Were there people who also on the others? Yeah, but we're not talking about them. We're talking about police accountability. And so, in this conversation anyway, I mean, I do think the city did well. I think most people were out to use their First Amendment rights. I am proud. I'm a big supporter of the police. I think you all work really hard. You probably do way too many other jobs that aren't policing, like counseling and interventions and all that. I mean, I understand all that, and I really want to work to change some of that way in which we put the burden on. But right now we're talking about police accountability. So the question really is, when will we know how many people were disciplined for not acting appropriately as police? And I actually think that ought to be a public discourse. You know, because you actually have people who have video, you have the Chronicle who reported, so that's public accountability. That's relational accountability. Were there other people who were involved? Yeah, sure. But I think this is the part that's really hard as a leader who holds my peers accountable. It's very difficult when I have to discipline them, and I also have to publicly discipline to say this person can no longer serve here anymore, or this person is being, on a leave of absence and getting some training in relational policing or whatever. I mean, so I think that's the thing that was really, I think you're going to do it, yes, but accountability has got to be public.
Can I dovetail on what Andy is saying a little bit?
Yes, sir.
I'm 69 years old. I'm native Houstonian. born and raised here in Houston, and when I began my pastorate, um, I, I started working with Kathy Whitmire on her advisory board, and I've been working almost with every mayor ever since then. So I've seen policing and police chiefs come through Houston when I was a kid, and the craziness of what they would do. And when Bull Connor and those guys were chief, and and I was actually on Kathy's board when we brought Lee Brown in and was talking about community policing and working along with that. So I've seen different kind of paradigms of how policing go and the effect of that it have on the community and what it does to the community. And it appears that the model that has been most successful over the ages is that community policing concept that Lee Brown brought in and kind of working within the community. I want to say, Chief, that I am extremely grateful to you. Actually, I'm proud of you for how you handled yourself. I think our city could have gone up in it could have been a mess.
Absolutely.
But I think because of your leadership and your guidance, a whole lots of things that could have happened didn't happen. And for that, I thank you. You displayed your passion, your tears, your anger, and you added a level of stability. While I'm not ready to deify you yet, but I think that your leadership in this city across other cities was superior and great. The problem, however, is it's not people like you that's on your, what are you, 4,500 now strong?
About 5,300.
About 5,300.
And a little under 1,000 non-sworn.
Yeah, it's not people like you that messes the issue up. It's the bad apples that messes up everything. And in your idea of wanting to be transparent and you spot a bad apple, what prohibits you? Are there civil service rules and regulations? Are there state rules and regulations? Or is contract with the police union that hinders you from being able to get rid of the bad apples? Because as joining on what Andy is saying, how do you be accountable and how do you get rid of those bad apples that causes everybody a problem? And I'll just point to this and stop. I work with the Anti-Defamation League, and I deal with the hate issues and the fact that you got these hate groups that's just coming from out of the woodwork now, that was hidden and infiltrating all areas, even the religious, even the faith community is plagued with these hate people. How do you get them out? How do you identify them? And what hinders you from being able to get rid of them? And how can we help you by standing alongside you, pushing and doing whatever we need to do to help you to be able to be as transparent and accountable as you want to be to get those apples out of there?
Absolutely, because as faith and community leaders, we have to work alongside our partners in law enforcement, not necessarily opposed to, because law enforcement plays a key role in the development of our city and the safety of our community.
Thank you for that. First of all, let me get back to Bishop real quick. Doyle, when we're done with these investigations, what happens, it's really interesting. In Austin, if I suspended an officer for one day, it would be on every evening news and in the newspaper and on the radio, because there's not any hard news in Austin when I was there for 9.5 years. But here I've run out 160 officers in 3.5 years, sadly. So it's not just some bad apples. That's a lot of bad apples out of 5,300. But every time that we suspend somebody or demote somebody or indefinitely suspend somebody, which means they're fired, that document that's called their disciplinary document, their charging document, is actually a public record that you can get at the civil service website. So I'm going to talk with the city about how they can make that more visible so people can see for themselves that we are holding people accountable. The second piece, Pastor, is that when I got to Austin in 2007 from California, I was told that when you fire somebody, it's 50-50 proposition that they will stay fired, because arbitration can be pretty arbitrary, and 50% of the people get their jobs back. Well, I'm proud to say that because I'm very consistent with my message to my officers. I'm going to tweet something later today at Art Acevedo if you want to see it on Twitter. A video I put out to my officers just in 2018. I'm doing another one on use of force so people can see how we instruct them. But we're very consistent in terms of what our expectations are. We treat everybody the same regardless of rank. If everybody's held accountable. And thirdly, I go to every single arbitration myself to testify when I fire somebody. So in 13 years in Texas, our batting average in terms of winning appeals when somebody gets fired is 975. I can count on one hand out of all the people that have been fired that appealed, those that have won. And it's been, like I said, it's about 975. But we do need to work on that. I think we need help on. Before people think that the police department, we're not the ones that the police chief isn't the one that negotiates contracts. We're at the table, but the ones that make the decisions on those contracts are the elected officials. And before I got here, before I get interview somebody, we've got to show them the statements of every other witness, right? Now, why would I want to show somebody the statements of every other witness before I interview them? That's something we need to get back, and we're going to try to work on. I'm not going to just try to work on it here. I'm going to try to work on it in the state legislature. The other thing that we need, I believe, is that across the country, the statute of limitations, if an officer engages in act of misconduct today, you have 180 days from the day that the act of misconduct occurred to actually uncover the misconduct, investigate the misconduct, and actually initiate disciplinary action, actually suspend, fire, demote the individual. Well, why should we reward people for being able to hide misconduct? It should be 180 days from the discovery of the misconduct, or at a minimum, we should come up with a statute of limitations. It's much more than 180 days. When I became a police officer in California under the Peace Officer Bill of Rights and the 3300 of the Government Code to 3311 or 12, it used to be 3 years from the date of occurrence, 3 calendar years. And then because of union influence with elected officials, they reduced it to 1 year. There's a lot of inconsistency. We've got to change that. And the last thing that I think that we need help with is that I don't care whether you think that anything's going to happen or not. If you are in contact with a member of law enforcement and you're not satisfied or they did not act appropriately, the community has to report it. We have to report it, because at the end of the day, our number one force multiplier as it relates to maintaining public safety, to keeping people safe, to keeping communities safe, is the community itself. And in order to police the police, we need the help of the community. 75% of our disciplinary cases are initiated internally. Now you can look at that and say, well, we're holding ourselves accountable, or you can translate it to being not enough people are calling in when we're not doing the right thing. So we need people that do two things. When we're not doing it right, you've got to report it, stand up for your friends, your neighbor, and yourself, but also understanding that we don't want police officers to think it's us against them mentality. When officers do good things, we need to lift up the good, because sometimes we live in a society where everybody's constantly wanting to do this, where if the bishop is giving a sermon and he says one word out of that made of, or the rabbi or the little devil got in your mind and you said something that's maybe out of play, my God, people will, 99% of your words might have been perfect, but you get one word wrong and people just seize on that. And we're living in a time where we're tearing each other down instead of building each other up. And I think we've got to do both in terms of policing. That's how you can help us. And Bishop, we will get back to everybody. One of the things I want to do with officer involved shootings, that in Austin, after every officer involved shooting and my investigation was done, we'd have a press conference and I'd walk the community through it and release the tapes and everything else. I want to do something similar here as well. But there's so much real news in the city. There's so much going on that what goes on in terms of accountability really doesn't make the news very much. So I'm going to have to do a better job of actually letting people know what we do.
Do you feel like your department has been? Do you feel like your department has any exposure, infiltration of hate mongers, hate groups within, hidden, embedded?
Well, I mean, we're part of society, and we know that bias and racism is alive and well in all walks of life, in all professions. And so I can tell you that to say that we don't have it here would be absolutely wrong. We just yesterday, I got a complaint on an officer that he was on a tirade, and we've had several of those. Now, some people may say, "Oh my God, how horrible!" I'm glad that for some reason, the George Floyd murder and the protests have all of a sudden triggered something, and people that have hate in their heart and they're actually they're out there getting on social media and doing things that where they're exposing themselves. I'm ecstatic because we can actually take action when people have hate in their heart or racist or biased. Let me just tell you, 3 weeks ago, we had a cadet in the academy. He's a brand new cadet. Tells somebody he was a member of a white supremacy group, and he couldn't wait to get on the streets. Now, I'm grateful that a cadet that he told that to reported right away. Well, he's no longer part of our department. And then every time we fire somebody, including that person, what we do is we go back to the background to see what is there something there that we missed, or is there something there that we failed to check? And so, yes, Pastor, we've got to be. I don't think it's rampant, but let's say there's 800,000 cops, and let's just say 5% of 800,000 police officers are bad people. That's what, 40,000 bad apples running around doing bad things. That's a huge impact on society. So we have to be vigilant.
I want to give the last question over to Rabbi Hayon.
I got the hours up already.
I know, went quick.
Wow.
The last thing that I wanted to get to is to drill a little bit deeper into this question about reform and some policy adjustments that you might make. Before I get into the question, one other thing that was sort of on my mind after the bishop's question. I don't think there's a lot of areas in which faith leaders can help the police learn how to do your jobs. But one thing that might be an instructive part of our experience is that I can't speak for every denomination or anything like that, but I know that when religious orders or denominations have faced our own cases of bad apples, they have resulted in changes from top to bottom, not just in the disciplinary section when someone does something bad to try to figure out how to punish or counsel them out, but from the process of application to seminary, the counseling they get when they're being trained, mentorship, guidance, therapy, making sure to identify people that have problems with sexual ethics or with money or with power to make sure that they can be counseled out before they do harm. So that's just one thing to think about, that there may be something structural that can that can be preventative rather than punitive. All right, so the last thing that I want to get to is this question about police reform that was the thing that brought 60,000 people into the streets and that have been making headlines and op-eds and TV interviews for the past month or so. We've been really grateful to hear the way that you've been making yourself available to the people, your willingness to build and regain trust, and to try to examine the calls for reform in police policy and the work that y'all do. Part of this has been a call for abolition, defunding, de-escalation alternatives. I know that maybe not everybody knows, we do already have a homeless outreach unit at HPD. We've got the crisis intervention response team that are also addressing other ways for the the police to help de-escalate and resolve conflict without violence and, frankly, without incarceration. So can you talk a little bit about the extent to which you might be considering expanding these kinds of teams or those teams themselves, other areas where we could create different programs that we could explore alternatives to direct intervention, explore alternatives to incarceration, and hopefully reduce the incidences of direct conflict and violence?
Thanks, Rabbi. Thank you for pointing that out. We're actually a learning site for the rest of the country as it relates to a lot of our programs. As imperfect as we are, we're headed. I always say that you can't appreciate what's in front of you unless you have a point of reference, right? You can't appreciate a good police department if you've never been served by a truly bad police department. You can't appreciate a good rabbi who actually gives a sermon that is earth-shattering, unless you've had something. You got to have a comparison. I've been in 3 different departments now in my career and served 3 different cities, and I can tell you that our programs, whether it's at the Ed Emmett Center, where 68% of the low-level misdemeanors that are in psychological, that have mental health issues, rather than arrest them, it's the Houston Police Department that is dropping them off there with no criminal charges, or the Houston Home Outreach Team that last year almost 400 people were transitioned off of the streets with the help of the outreach team, because that a lot of the people that are homeless it's either mental illness or addiction or a combination of both, and it takes time to build that trust and that relationship to get the individuals to trust you, to get them to a better place. So we our people don't know that we actually have at our call center, and I was so grateful that the mayor and council gave us the money finally to continue this, where we have mental health professionals at the call center, where rather than responding a police car, the mental health professional is actually connecting with the person online, right, over the phone, and we prevent any kind of conflict or physical confrontation. Or our CERT team that goes out with a counselor and an officer, and they're dressed down in different in polo shirts. And so we're doing a lot of good things. The problem is we don't have enough people doing those good things because of, I know people don't want to hear this, but this department hasn't really grown. Despite the city growing by 500,000 in the last 20 years, our department has not grown. We have 5,300 police officers today. We've cut our support staff by over 50% from 2,000 to under 1,000. That has an impact on the workflow, and the problem is somebody's got to do the same work that those 2,000 people are doing it. So we would like to expand those programs in terms of reinventing and defunding. The abolitionists, forget about it. I can't even close a storefront in my communities without the community being really upset. They don't want less police. They want better policing. They want the good officers. They want to have, the services like everyone else. So what we need to do is try to increase those, Rabbi. It's a funding issue right now, trying to balance everything. But for every one of that goes wrong, here's where we're not doing a very good job. There are tens of thousands of very dynamic incidents that are handled absolutely close to perfect. The problem is that never makes the news. So one of the things that I've been tasking my team with is that when we arrest a violent individual wanted for murder or aggravated robbery or aggravated assault or whatever it may be, without a scratch on them, we've got to highlight that somehow instead of the ones where we don't get it right. So we're going to continue to explore doing that to try to expand those programs. And lastly, I will just say this. Law enforcement is not opposed to taking stuff off of our plate and having other entities do it. The problem is you got to build that infrastructure and that capacity on the front end before you take it away from us now, because we don't want to lapse. And here's the sad truth. What they're going to find is the Ed Emmett Center is great, but that's just 1 or 2 day program, and then they're back out on the street. We have got to invest, and the communities of color and poor communities should not have to choose more investment at a cost of their own safety, because the people in River Oaks, they're going to continue to pay for the River Oaks Patrol. They're going to continue to pay for the constables. They're going to continue to be safe. What we need is if the government in this country could print $3 trillion plus when COVID impacted north, south, east, west, white, black, brown, Asian, Muslim, Christian, Jew, rich and poor. They printed $3 trillion. Imagine if they just spent $1 trillion additional dollars to deal with homelessness, public education, public health, mental health. Imagine economic opportunity, jobs programs. Imagine with $1 trillion, just $1 trillion, how many lives we could change and how much conflict on the back end we can prevent, because we're going to have a better society. So we need to demand that the government at all level has the same commitment to communities and communities of color and poor communities, including poor white communities. Because what I always tell Democrats when I see them out here, there's a lot of white anger out there in poor white communities. And they go, why? Because nobody talks about them. There's a lot of poor white people in this country that no one talks about. So we need a lot of work to do. And I think it will take communities of faith and all of us coming together, because none of us live on an island and we're radically dependent on one another. And we need to do a lot of work moving forward.
In wrapping up, thank you, Chief. That was a terrific response. And these diversion programs have proven time and time again to result in peaceful outcomes and more sustainable outcomes. Can we have our faith leaders give some parting takeaways? Bishop Doyle.
Well, I appreciate the discussion around accountability, and I think also the discussion around kind of the pressures that you see within the wider city of Houston. And I think what I would be eager for is a follow-up conversation with you in September, maybe in a similar format, so that we could really see what the accountability looks like. I think a big piece of this for me is it's really difficult for institutions to not find a mechanical fix, and to understand that actually communicating what they're doing to their people is part of the issue of accountability and transparency.
Rabbi Hayon.
Great. Thanks again for the time. Really good to connect with you again. I think my parting thought would also be to urge all of us to remember that this isn't just about these protests, and this is not just about this tragic death or this episode of officer-involved violence, but you're right, at a crisis point in the country. This is a real boiling point, and without sounding cynical, let's not waste this crisis. Let's use the energy from this crisis to propel us forward into some really long overdue changes in the ways that we police ourselves, the way that we look after each other, the way that we keep our communities safe. I and my community are eager to be your partners in figuring out that way forward and being a part of the solution.
Pastor Clemens.
Yeah, again, thank you, Gunny, for assembling this and bringing us all together. Thank you, Chief, for your comments and your leadership. As I stated earlier, I've seen a number of different kind of police modeling, and the one that seems to be the most effective, based on looking from the outside in and being a person of the community, is this community policing concept. I hope that would be a model that you would continue to push, and perhaps maybe it could start with having a faith-based committee that would meet with you on the regular basis to hear from you what your pressures and your concerns are, and then for us to communicate, or whomever you would choose on that committee, to communicate to you what the pressures and concerns are in the within the community, and to come together as a unified force to solve those issues, as opposed to coming together in the midst of a crisis, responding to something, but consistently meeting and working together. So again, thank you so very much.
Chief Acevedo, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know this is an incredibly busy time, this incredibly busy season, especially with Corona, the unrest that we're seeing, so many developments happening within your agency as well. And thank you to the faith leaders for taking the time out of your day to really have this conversation, have a hard conversation with Chief Acevedo. I know we're all accountable to our own faith communities, and we're gonna have some questions. But we want to be able to say that we have a dialogue going with Chief Acevedo. Chief Acevedo, September, do you feel is a good time that we can reconnect?
Oh, absolutely.
And Pastor Clemens was talking about a faith advisory committee for your office. Is that something that we can have a discussion around?
Absolutely. You know, we have the Police and Clergy Alliance that we meet monthly with as well, but that's a big group. But I think that having a smaller group, maybe a steering committee, just to open up lines of communication, that would be great across all faiths. And I look forward to having that conversation.
Thank you, Chief. Pastor Clemens, could you do us the honor of closing us out with the blessing?
Thank you. Certainly. It is to you, the creator of the universe and the ruler of the cosmos, that we now present ourselves before you. To ask God for your blessings upon this planet, to ask for your blessings more immediately upon our community. We pray, God, for the leadership, political leadership, the religious and faith-based leadership within our cities. We pray for wisdom and for knowledge and for understanding, for discipline and for courage. We ask, God, that you would help us to be ambassadors of reconciliation, helping to reconcile the world to you, so that the kingdom of heaven may be realized here on earth. Hold us, keep us, is our plea. We thank you for being a wonderful and great God. And we ask, God, that you bless our city. Now, these are the words of our mouth and the meditation of our hearts. It is our prayer that they would be acceptable in your sight. This is each of our prayer, all in our own ways, but many of us in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. My name is Sharik Abdul Ghani. I'm the director of Minaret Foundation, where our focus is multi-faith and civic engagement for the Muslim community. We really appreciate all our panelists here today, especially Chief Acevedo for taking the time out of his day. Thank you all, and blessings as your week continues.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Thank you.